Good day, everyone, and Mr. Sobrevilla. I am Margaria Dalva, and together with
Redeem Rapis.
Aphrodite Grace S. Bancolmo.
Palo Alan Garci.
and we are Group 6, and we are here to present a part of Module 6, which is Thinking Like a Historian. Now, here we have the salient points. First, the dimensions of historical thinking. Second, the expected skills and competencies. The preliminary considerations in conducting research. And the example of research paper and identification of its parts. Now we have here Ms. Redeem Rapis to discuss the first part.
Dimensions of historical thinking. So during our time studying this course, ano nga ba ang ginagawa natin? We think like a historian. We become students of history. When we say we think like a historian, of course there would be a lot of readings and critical thinking. We were also required to ask questions and examine historical records. We analyze different histories, and of course we do our own historical research. So while we students of history are doing these things, we adapt these 5 interconnected dimensions of historical thinking. So these are the outcomes that students need to achieve. These skills are needed in making a historical research. So first is the chronological thinking. So chronological thinking is at the heart of historical thinking. Students need to know the arrangement of dates, places, and when and where the event happened. So from the word chronological, which is pagkasunod-sunod. So need natin malaman yung pagkasunod-sunod ng mga pangyayari sa history. So first is the distinguish between past, present, and future time. Students should be able to analyze patterns of the event's duration. Identify the temporal structure of a historical narrative or story. Students should analyze the event succession. It requires understanding the sequence in which the historical events unfold, providing a clear framework for comprehending the passage of time with the narrative. Establish the temporal order in constructing historical narratives for their own. By establishing temporal order in constructing historical narratives, students provide a structured and accessible framework for conveying the complexities of the past. Measure and calculate calendar time. Students need to make use of their mathematical skills to calculate and measure the dates and time. Interpret data presented in timelines and create timelines. To be able to know if a student has analyzed it very well, they should be able to make a date timeline and about the event. Reconstruct patterns of historical successions and duration. Explain historical continuity and change. This process allows students to discern the patterns and trends that characterize the events. Next, and lastly, compare alternative models of periodization. Alternative models for periodization are various approaches employed by historians to divide and characterize historical time into distinct periods. Next is historical comprehension. So this involves the student's capacity to read and comprehend the past within its appropriate context. Students shall be able to identify the individuals involved in the event, pinpoint its location, analyze the contributing factors, and understand the consequences that ensued. So identify the author or source of the historical document or narrative and assess its credibility. Determine who wrote the document or create a narrative. Evaluate the credibility of the source. By identifying the author or the source and assessing its credibility, students can make informed judgments about the reliability and authenticity of historical documents or narratives. Reconstruct the literal meaning of a historical passage. Reconstructing the literal meaning of a historical passage involves assembling the clear and factual information provided in the text to grasp the events or description being conveyed. Identify the central questions the historical narrative addresses. Identifying the question or questions addressed in a historical narrative enables students to gain clear insight into the narrative's purpose and focus. Differentiate between historical facts and historical interpretations. So distinguishing between historical facts and historical interpretation can be a very crucial for understanding the complexities of studying the past. So historical facts, these are the events, occurrences, or details from the past that are verifiable and agreed upon by historians. They are factual and objective, typically supported by tangible evidence and agreed upon by the historians. Next is the historical interpretation. It involves the analysis and valuation and subjective explanation of historical events or phenomena. It is influenced by historians' perspective. Next is read historical narratives imaginatively. It prompts students to submerge themselves in the historical context, empathize with the individuals of that era, and visualize the world during those times. Next, appreciate historical perspectives. It involves developing a clear understanding of the varied viewpoints of history. Draw upon data into historical maps. So it involves extracting valuable information and insights from maps created during the specific historical period. And lastly, utilize visual, mathematical, and quantitative data. So next is Ms. Boncolmo.
Good day, everyone. I am Aphrodite Grace S. Boncolmo, and now I'll be explaining the historical analysis and interpretation. So, what do we mean by it? Historical analysis involves breaking down complex historical events or phenomena into smaller components for a detailed examination. So, nakatutok ito sa mga sanhi at bunga and also the key factors that contributed or result from historical events. And of course, there are different methods. We have the primary sources, the secondary sources, and the contextualization. Let's give some example. So example, we analyze the causes of a war by examining its economic differences, regional tensions, and the role of, example, the slavery. Now, let's explain what is historical interpretation. When we say historical interpretation, it involves constructing meaning from historical evidence and presenting a coherent and plausible understanding of the past. It goes beyond the mere narration of facts that provided insight, perspective, and analysis. So the first one, we have the compare and contrast differing sets of idea. So let's give some example. Compare and contrast of the political ideologies of Jose Rizal and Andres Bonifacio during the Philippine Revolution. It's examined how their different perspectives influenced the course of the revolution and the vision they had to the future of the Philippines. Next is we should consider multiple perspective. When we say we should consider multiple perspective, we analyze the declaration, or example, we analyze the declaration of martial law by Ferdinand Marcos, and we look into the different perspective of the government officials, opposition figures, and many more. Next, we have the analyzed cause and effect relationships and multiple causation, including the importance of the individual and the influence of ideas. So the example is we investigate the causes of the People Power Revolution in 1986, considering both the economic factors and the role key of individuals like Corazon Aquino. Next is we draw comparison across era and regions in order to define enduring issues. So if we're going to give some example is we compare the struggles of the independence in the Philippines or the other Southeast Asia countries. So we identify the enduring issues related to the colonization. And now let's proceed to distinguish between unsupported expressions of opinion and informed hypothesis. Example is we evaluate a historical account of the Philippine-American War, distinguishing between evidence-supported claims about the motivations of key figures and unsupported opinions or biases presented in the narrative. And we also have the compare competing historical narratives and the challenge arguments of historical inevitability. So if we're going to give some example is that we challenge the notion that the declaration of the martial law in 1972 was exploring alternative decisions that could have been made by the leaders at that time. And last but not the least is we also have the hypothesis, the influence of the past, hypothesis how the legacy of Spanish colonization influences socio-economic and cultural of the Philippines. Now let's proceed to the second one. Yes, Now, I'm going to discuss the historical research capabilities, but what does it mean? It means it encompasses a set of skills and methodologies that historians employ to investigate, analyze, and interpret the past. These capabilities are crucial for acquiring a deep understanding of historical events, societies, and individuals. So the example is the archival research. And now let's delve into the different research capabilities. First, we have the formulate historical questions. These involve crafting specific and focused questions that guide historical inquiry. Questions should be clear, researchable, and designed to deepen understanding of historical events or phenomena. Next, we have the obtain historical data from a variety of sources. Historians need to gather data from a diverse range of primary and secondary sources to build a comprehensive understanding of historical events. Example is collecting data from government archives, oral history interviews with farmers affected by the agrarian reform. The third one is interrogate historical data. This involves critically examining and questioning the reliability, biases, and perspectives present in the historical resources. Now, let's discuss the letter D, which is identify gaps in the available records, marshal contextual knowledge and perspective of time and place. So historians need to recognize what information is missing, consider the broader historical context, and incorporate diverse perspectives to fill gaps in the narrative. The next one is to employ quantitative analysis. Using quantitative methods to analyze numerical data, statistics, or patterns within historical research. Like in the Philippine setting, employing quantitative analysis to examine trends in land distribution before the CARP implementation, evaluating the effectiveness of the program and the redistributing agricultural land. Last is we have the support interpretations with the historical evidence. Historians must provide robust evidence to support their interpretations and arguments, drawing from primary and, of course, the secondary sources. Next. Now we have the historical issue analysis and decision making. So it involves examining past events and their implications to inform present day choices and actions. This process requires a thorough understanding of historical context, an assessment of the factors that shape historical events, and an exploration of potential lessons for contemporary decision making. The first one, we have identify issues and problems in the past. This involves recognizing and defining historical problems or challenges that shape the course of events. Like from our previous discussion, the Cry of Pugad-Lawin in 1896, identifying the issue of land inequality and agrarian unrest during the Spanish colonial period. And next, we have the martial evidence of antecedent circumstances, gathering and presenting evidence that sheds light on the circumstances or conditions that preceded a particular historical issue or event. Now we have identify relevant historical antecedents, recognizing and understanding that historical events and factors that directly influence or serve as prosecutors to a particular issue. And we also have we're now gonna discuss the evaluate alternative course of action, assessing different potential actions or decisions that could have been taken in response to a historical issue. Example is that evaluating alternative courses of action during the Philippine-American War, such as diplomatic negotiations to understand the potential impact of the trajectory of the Philippine history. Now I have to formulate a position or course of action and issue. Developing a stance or plan of action based on the analysis of historical evidence and alternative courses of action. Last, we have the evaluate the implementation of a decision, assessing the effectiveness kung epektibo ba ito and the consequences of decision made in response to historical issue once they have been implemented. So for our next presenter, we have
Thank you, Ms. Boncolmo. Now let us discuss the preliminary considerations in conducting a historical research. Now, before we move on to that, next slide, please. We have to identify the two types of approaches, which is the qualitative and quantitative research. Now, both of them has their own disadvantages and advantages and their own methods and features. For quantitative research, it is more on number-based, and meaning it is more on statistical analysis. And the data obtained here is from surveys and experiments. Meanwhile, in qualitative research, it is more on text-based. It is exploratory, meaning it has a larger sample size. That means that coming from the text base, it is more on narrative description, interpretation, and evaluation. And the data obtained here comes from interviews and observations. Ngayon na alam na natin yung mga features nila, ano nga ba yung ginagamit nating approach when it comes to historical research? Now, in historical research, we use the qualitative approach. This is because it requires systematic collection, critical investigation of the obtained data, and examination of historical evidence. Although, minsan ginagamit ang quantitative research approach, hindi siya gaanong ginagamit kasi hindi naman laging gumagamit ng statistical analysis when we try to conduct a historical research. Now, let us move on to the 5 preliminary considerations. Next slide, please. Now, first, we have here the selection and formulation of topic or approach. Now, this is the first and foremost fundamental stage in conducting research. Dito, kung ano man yung magiging topic na mabubuo natin, it will determine kung ano yung magiging methods and kung ano yung magiging approach ng research paper natin. So there are 3 systematic factors that should be taken into account when selecting a topic. First one, we have the appeal. So this strategy, we should identify an area of knowledge that entails the ability to draw audience and provide additional information. Syempre, kung hindi natin i-consider yung appeal ng research topic natin, kulang yung magiging audience natin, hindi siya magiging interactive. And then next, we have the intention. So intention meaning we must have a purpose. So writing while utilizing your purpose, it will be beneficial as you decide on the format, on how to structure and focus the paper, what kind of references to include, and kung gaano kadami yung content na ilalagay mo sa research paper mo. And lastly, we have the relevance. So it is important to cover a subject that is particularly conducive or suitable or appropriate with the expectations and interest of your target audience. Katulad nga ng appeal natin, kung hindi magiging engaging yung topic natin, hindi masyadong i-engage ng mga audience natin yung research paper natin. Now we have the review relevant background literature. So in this stage, it is essential for us to search for relevant publications, further researches, studies, articles regarding our topic as well. Kasi dito tayo makakakuha ng iba pang sources. We must also assess the information that is gathered from those sources. Kung credible ba sila, kung authentic sila, kung dapat ba silang pagkatiwalaan. We must also locate from those sources any research gaps. Kasi lahat naman ng research papers may gaps, and we must be able to identify those research gaps in order to address those problems and answer those problems in our historical research. And lastly, we must establish a structure in order for us to be organized in our whole paper. And for the third, we have to articulate the historical purpose and research questions. Now, in conducting a historical research, it is important to examine, compare, and contrast other associated studies and articles, like what I said with the second one. Because kailangan na tinitingnan natin kung credible ba yung mga sources na kinukuha natin. And we must also take into consideration the time period and historical context. Syempre, may mga times na yung historical research natin is not up to date. That is why we must think and look for other sources as well para alam natin kung authentic yung mga nakukuha natin each sources. And lastly, we must also expand and be open to the population and geographic scope that we are gathering. Kasi syempre na hindi naman dapat na close tayo, close yung mind natin when we conduct a historical research. We must be open to it because there are also other observations and other opinions from other areas. And now let us move on to the next slide. Identify the historical methods utilized. So, mahalaga na may method tayong sinusundan in order for us to be organized in the historical paper and walang paligoy-ligoy sa paper natin. Now we have here the different types of methods and instruments used in historical research. First, we have the contemporaneous corroboration. Now, what is contemporaneous corroboration? It is further support to provide the existing evidence about the past events. So, maaaring sa research paper natin, we use a powerful method that generally uses the other historical research to establish other facts beyond the limited lifespan or sources. Next, we have the historical revisionism. So, lagi nating itong nakikita. And one example of this is the works of Rizal. So this is more on traditionally used in a completely natural sense to describe the work or idea of a historian who has revised rather a previously accepted view of a particular topic. So from the word revisionism, a historian revises. Now we have the social change. So coming from the word change, it changes in the nature of the social institutions, the social behavior, or the social interrelations of a society or community of people. So one example of this is historical evolution. Another is the change log. So this is the book log or record of change and development or evolution by which human beings as distinctively is considered as special. So more on records to. And lastly, we have one unique methodological tool that we use for historical research, which is photography. So this is more on collection of all known information about the individual in a given period. So we collect pictures, images, videos na maaari natin gamitan as primary sources in our historical research. And lastly, we have the fifth preliminary consideration. Next slide. It is to determine the sources of primary and secondary data. Now, in research, primary sources, primary data, is considered as authentic and obtained directly firsthand from original documents or research. It consists of raw data and unmodified records that haven't been examined or interpreted by other researchers. So this includes autobiographies, artifacts, biofacts, audio recordings, and diaries. Now, kung ang primary source natin ay authentic, original, raw data, first-hand source, our secondary source is from a second-hand. So secondary data is information provided second-hand. It is referred to as a testimony or probably an overview of multiple primary sources. So ginagamit to more on biographies, journals, newspapers, articles, and textbooks. So these are mostly summaries and synthesis of other literary works. So knowing that the author of secondary sources has the authority to express his viewpoint, this could include biases and opinions. So, minsan hindi rin credible ang secondary sources natin. That is why we must be aware of the word on authenticity and credibility. So it is important to examine the source's origin, internal consistency, author background and experiences, context, physical attributes, and cross-references with reliable sources. And now we have here Mr. Agpalo to further give us examples of historical paper.
So good day, everyone. Today, I will explain the example of research paper and the identification of its part. So sa last part nito, magkakaroon ako ng example ng gawa namin nung senior high school na research namin. So next slide po. Next. So ngayon, magkaroon muna tayo ng comparison kung ano nga ba yung historical paper sa research paper, kung ano yung difference nila. Sa research paper, ang ginagawa ng mga writer dyan, kukuha ng mga research, mga past research, and ang goal niya doon is magkaroon ng panibagong idea or gagawa ng ibang idea. And sa historical paper naman, dito naman yung pinagsasama-sama natin yung mga past events like for example, yung sa naging first lesson natin, saan nga ba unang nagkaroon ng first mass na napagtatagpi-tagpi ng writer yon and nakagawa siya ng conclusion. So, pa-next. So, pumunta naman tayo sa parts of a research paper. Ang pinakauna sa first page ay makita natin ang title. Ang title ay dapat na binubuo lang ng maiksi and dapat connected yung title natin doon sa mismong idea ng research natin. So, magbibigay ako ng example. For example, yung kay Jose Rizal na Noli Me Tangere. Hindi siya research paper pero alam ko na nabasa nyo na din to and alam nyo ba guys na ang Noli Me Tangere ay isang Latin word na meaning ay do not touch me and ay nagre-refer sa episode of Mary Magdalena first encounter with Christ after his resurrection. So kung mapapanood nyo yun or kung nabasa nyo na yun, maintindihan nyo na connected naman talaga yung Noli Me Tangere na gawa ni Rizal doon sa mismong meaning ng Noli Me Tangere. And mapunta naman tayo sa abstract. Sa abstract naman, dito naman natin ito yung summarization ng buong research natin. Ayan, ito yung example ng title. Ito yung gawa naman namin sa dati naming school. Ito yung the effect of having time management on the academic performance of senior high school student of WCC North Manila in academic year 2022 to 2023. So, ayan yung naging title namin. And mapunta naman tayo sa abstract. Again, ito ay maiksi lamang pero andito na lahat ng andito na yung parang summarization niya sa buong research natin. Andito yung research idea natin, kung ano nga ba yung goal natin dito sa research na to and kung ano yung mga methods na ginamit natin. So sa next. So sa next naman sa introduction. Sa introduction naman, dito naman natin ilalagay or bibigyan natin ng diin kung bakit nga ba natin naisip na gawin yung mismong topic na to. So, ayun, dito, mas lalo nating binibigyan diin and mas lalo nating, dito din natin ilalagay kung bakit natin siya naisip. And dapat, guys, sa isang research paper, dapat yung research paper na gagawin nyo is timeless. So, para mas i-engganyoin din pala natin dito yung mga maggagawa pa ng other research para mas lalo siyang lumawak and mas lalong mabigyan ng sagot yung mga tanong na hindi pa natin nasasagot. Scope and delimitation. Sa scope and delimitation, dito naman guys, meron siyang two part. Sa scope and delimitation, dito natin linalagay yung mismong sakop lang ng research natin and yung limitation niya. So, kung madami kasi nag-overextend and nawawala na sa mismong idea yung linalagay nila sa research. And dito, iniiwasan natin na mangyari din sa research paper yun. Since ang research paper ay madaming makakabasa and hindi lang basta student, pati yung mga ibang researchers or ibang mga teachers, prof, ganyan. And for the next one, sa methodology. Sa methodology, guys, meron tayong tatlong types niyan. Ang qualitative research, quantitative research, and mixed methods. Yung sa methodology, pwede tayong mag-survey, pwede tayong mag-tanong-tanong or magkaroon tayo ng, ayun, sinabi ko nga na survey. And pwede tayong maghanap pa ng mga ibang research na kukuhain natin yung idea nila and ipagsasama-sama natin. Ayun yung sa methodology. Again, meron siyang tatlong example, which is yung qualitative, quantitative, and yung mixed method na pinagsama yung qualitative and quantitative. So for the next one, ang main body. Sa main body naman, ang main body, dito natin linalagay yung question and dito na din natin siya sinasagot. So sa main body, katulad ng mga sinabi ko sa introduction, di ba meron tayong mga statement of the problem. Dito natin ilalagay yung mga sagot natin doon. And dito din natin i-explain lahat bago tayo magkaroon ng conclusion. So yung sa next natin, next slide. So sa conclusion naman, dito na natin pinagsama-sama lahat ng sagot natin and dito tayo makakagawa ng mga kung ano nga ba yung naisip natin during nung ginagawa natin yung mismong research paper. The next. So sa works cited, katulad ng mga sinabi ng past reporter, meron tayong iba't ibang types nito, yung APA, MLA, and yung Chicago na madalas natin ginagamit. So sa works cited, ito yung citation natin kung saan linalagay natin yung mga reference, yung mga links ng mga ginamitan natin, ng mga kinuha natin or hiniram natin na idea. So sa next slide. Sa additional information, dito naman natin linalagay yung mga naging sagot. For example, sa survey, dito na natin linalagay yung mga naging sagot nila doon, kung ano nga ba yung mas madami, ganyan. And that's all lang para sa aking report. So para sa summarization ng mga sinabi namin dito, andito si Miss Aphrodite Boncol.
Yes, in wrapping up our group presentation and thinking like historians, we've uncovered the key elements of historical analysis. This journey through the past equipped us with a new perspective, emphasizing the importance of critical thinking and historical insight. Let's carry the skills forward, ensuring a thoughtful approach to understanding and navigating the complexities of history. Again, we are Group 6, and thank you for listening.